Okay, let's make maps look nice, because by default, they don't. If you just do a dot plot, you're going to get something that looks like this. I actually appreciate how ugly this is because it gives us a really good reason to change it. If it were almost good, we might just ignore it and have ugly maps, but no, it is terrible looking, so we have a lot of work to do here. Now, there are 10,000 different ways to customize these graphics. I'm telling you one specific way, but that doesn't mean other ways don't work. So if you find something that has different information than what you learned here, just know they might both be right. The two ways we're going to customize our maps is we're going to, 1, pass parameters to .plot, or 2, we are going to work with the ax variable. These options come right from the popular Python graphing library called matplotlib. In fact, the maps we're making here are technically matplotlib graphs. They just happen to have countries and cities and stuff inside. So if you know anything about matplotlib, you could probably apply those exact same things here with geopandas mapping. For example, if we have this graph here, we have this map here, and we want to make it bigger. In order to make it bigger, we're going to send .plot something called fig size. Fig size takes two numbers, a width, which I'm saying is 20, and a height, which is 20. The map will automatically fill the space up to the largest size, and it will still honor the aspect ratio. So it's not going to be 20 tall if 20 wide is good enough, and then it doesn't need to take up that much space. The only other thing to think about fig size is it will only be as big as your screen. Even if the image is actually bigger than your screen, Jupyter Notebook will shrink it to be the proper size. So you never have to worry about something running off of the side, but you also need to think about the fact that even though it looks like it's this wide, it might even be larger. Next up, let's say we want to turn these axes off, this box around it and these numbers. Because let's be honest, I don't care about the latitude and longitude that we're looking at right now. So we need to do this a little bit differently than we did fig size. What we need to do is take our plot and save it as a variable called ax. And once we have this axis variable, we can say, hey, turn off your axes. And despite the fact that it is axis, it will turn off both of them. Isn't that beautiful? Not really beautiful, but we got rid of the border around the outside. You can use a ton of different other options with ax or a lot of methods from ax, but that's definitely the most frequent. Beyond resizing your map and turning off the ugly box, the most common changes that you'll make by far deal with colors and outlines. So you change these differently for shapes than you do for points or markers. So we'll start off with shapes and then we'll move on to points. If we look at this plot of the US, each one of these states is a color and they're all outlined in black. A lot of the times we want to graph something on top of a map of those states, so maybe cities or something, and we want the map to kind of fade into the background. Not to disappear completely, but just kind of not be so visible. If we want to see an example, if I Googled New York Times graphs or New York Times maps, you see all of these maps with a nice faded version of the United States. And that's because if it's faded, it'll allow all of the information to stand out a little bit more. So what we're going to do is we're going to reproduce this. We're going to make the map gray, and then we're going to make the lines separating the states turn white. When you deal with coloring shapes, there are two different parts, two different sections to a shape. Number one is the fill, which is the inside part. That's the green right here, the blue right here. Then you have what's called normally the stroke, but in Matplotlib, it's called either the line or the edge, and that is the outline that goes around our shape. So whenever you're picking colors, whenever you're picking styles, just be aware that you're dealing with both of these most of the time. So if we want to set the color of the fill, we're going to say color. If we want to say the color of the edge, we're going to say edge color. I'm going to steal this from here, and then I'm going to say color equals gray. Remember, color here is the fill. And then I'm going to say edge color equals white, because the stroke here is the edge color. And there we go. We have a beautiful map faded into the background. Now the thing is that there are plenty of named colors out there, things like gray, things like white, but if we want to get pickier, we're also able to use what's called hexadecimal colors, or hex colors. So for example, instead of gray, you might type pound CCCCCC. Run that again, and it'll give us a gray color. A pure red, on the other hand, might be pound FF0000. This is R, this is red, the first two, green, and blue. And you're like, what? You can go look that up later. I promise it'll be okay. They're not hard. You don't have to memorize them. It's good to brush up on what hex numbers are or hex colors are, just so you can be a little bit better at design. Another thing you're going to want to change is the size of this outline here. We're going to keep ours red for the second, just so you can see this change. The funny thing about changing the outline is you'd think that if edge color set the color of this, edge width would set the width of it. Not true. It's actually line width. So I'm going to change mine to line width equals 5. See, nice and thick. If you want something exceptionally thin though, you can also go below 1. You could also go down to, let's say, 0.25, and it'll give you a very, very thin line. Not so bad, right? We'll learn to color with data eventually, but for now, we're just going to keep it simple. So next up, we're going to move on to markers, or points. In order to plot markers or points, we need another data set. I'm going to use a data set of power plants. So here we go, just a bunch of power plants. I'm going to do dot plot and turn off the axes, and I'll get a nice, not quite beautiful map of all of the power plants in America. Once I have that map, it seems a little small. So just like before, when I said fig size, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to make this map a little bit bigger. So when you plot markers, it's pretty much the same as plotting shapes. It's just dot plot, you have fig size, you have axes, you have a lot of the same other commands and a lot of the same other options. But the size and the coloring are going to be completely different. So before we had color and we had edge color. Now we're still going to use color. So if I want to make all of these be green, I'll just say color equals green. And there we go. We have some nice green map. We can't see it very well though because of all of those outlines there, right? Remember, every single component that we color has a fill on the inside and a stroke or line or edge around the outside. So in this situation, the way that we change that is marker edge color. Let's make it purple. And we can also set marker edge width. Despite the fact that last time it was line width, if we set the width of the markers, these little circles here, we use marker edge width. And I'll make that 3. So this is clearly a terrible, terrible graphic. Our fill color has been overwhelmed by the marker edges just because those marker edges are so thick and every single individual marker is so small. So 2 more things we can change is we can make the circles bigger and we can make them a little bit transparent so we can see their overlap. So I'm going to copy this code down here. I'm going to get rid of marker edge color because now I really don't care. And I'm going to make the marker edges completely go away so they can't overwhelm the actual color of the markers themselves. I'm going to make the markers bigger by saying marker size equals 5. And then I'm going to make them 50% opaque by saying alpha equals 0.5. You can use alpha with polygons too. It's just much more common if you're using it with markers because you might have a cluster of markers in one specific area. There you go, looking good. We got an area over here that's a little bit less dense in terms of power plants, but everywhere over here, over here, over here, full of power plants. The last thing that you'll probably want to do is zoom in on part of your maps. Right now, we have Hawaii and Alaska taking up a lot of space, when all I really care about is the continental US. So, how do we do that? First thing I'm going to do is let's look at this graphic without the axis off. I want to see what the numbers are in terms of latitude and longitude that I'd like to crop to. Because what I'm really looking for is to just draw a box around here and only graph the area around the continental United States. Give it another second to populate. Give it many seconds to populate. Okay, so here's what we're looking at. This goes up to about 50, down to about 20, and then about -30 on the x-axis to about -60 on the x-axis. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this same code from before. Along with doing ax.axis off, we're also going to set the limits for the x-axis and the limits for the y-axis. So I'll say ax, set xlim, give it a list. The smallest number I want is, let's say, -30. The biggest number, let's say -60. And then we'll do the same thing for the y-axis. The smallest number is, let's say, 20. The biggest number is, let's say, 50. So we'll run this, and even though it wants to draw all of these things here, we're manually setting the limits. GeoPandas assumes we want to see every single shape in our geodata frame. It wants to show us everything. But by saying xlim and ylim, it will break it down so that you only see the parts that you're interested in. It's kind of like zooming in. So there you go. Looks beautiful. It's a terrible projection, but that's not what we're here for. We're just here to customize some map styles. So hopefully now we're pretty okay on how to customize our maps. Map size, map colors, line width, resizing, zooming in, things like that. We haven't gotten too crazy yet, but now that we know the basics, we could definitely get started on making some beautiful maps.